Should you train for strength or for size or muscle mass or hypertrophy in the gym? Me and my brother were just having this conversation the other day. The reason was because he's training quite hard, quite intensely, and he wants to become a pro football player, which he eventually will become. I believe in him. Basically, he's trying to up his bench, squat, and deadlift amount because, of course, those look really good to colleges when they're considering whether to accept people for football scholarships, right? Those are like the big numbers that they care about. He's done very well up until a couple like months ago, right? Several months ago, where he's had this horrible plateau. He was doing great. He was doing fantastic on increasing those numbers on progressively overloading. And then he kind of stopped, especially with bench. He continued to try to hit bench a bunch to progressively overload to do his 1 rep max, right? But he just couldn't seem to get the number up. If he was very consistent and he attempted to do it, he could increase his strength a little bit, but it hasn't really touched his PR that he had a while back at all. And we were discussing why this is. He was quite frustrated about it. He was quite upset about it. And I wanted to see if I could offer maybe some insight, right? And so we were thinking about it. And what I kind of ended up explaining to him, I'm not necessarily a professional coach or anything like that, but I have been in the gym for 4 years and I know a thing or two about building an aesthetic physique, building up muscles, stuff like that. I told him, the size of your muscles will dictate how strong they can become. It's fairly straightforward, right? Whether you train for strength or for size is completely up to you. That depends on your goals, right? But the muscle mass that you have dictates sort of the upper ceiling of the strength that a muscle can push, right? Think about it this way. If you are mainly training for hypertrophy, and so you do your sets of 10, right? Hypertrophy is kind of like higher reps in volume. So you train higher reps during sets. You also try to train high weight, but not at the sacrifice of reps, right? It's like within the 8 to 12 range, I think is the golden range for hypertrophy. So you do your 10 reps and you're training for hypertrophy for a while and you start to feel good, right? You got like a lot of muscle mass that's, you're putting on. And then you decide, all right, I want to try and train for strength now. I want to get on the bench press and I want to really increase my strength. So instead of going for hypertrophy like you were, you begin training for strength, which means you could do like a warm-up, which is a bit higher rep, but generally you try to find your 1 rep max, right? So you do sets of like 2, 3, 1, sometimes a little bit more like 5 occasionally, right? But generally it's lower reps and higher weight. And so the gratification you get from that is you can progressively overload to doing a lot of weight, like maybe 300 pounds for 1 rep, which feels really good. You can tell people, oh, I hit 300 pounds. It feels great. Problem is your muscles have an upper limit to how much they can push, right? The volumes, the area of your muscles dictates the force that it can generate. So what I believe happened with my brother is he was training for hypertrophy for a while, right, in the gym, and he was doing great at it. And then he switched to a strength style training because he was doing football and they had him kind of on that as well. And so he kind of moved away from the 10 rep stuff, right? He was doing more like 7, 6 reps. And then of course on bench, he was doing the 1 rep max a lot. The problem is, I believe he hit the upper limit of his muscular development, right? The volume of muscle that he has can only push up to a certain amount of weight before it gets really hard to improve. If you really try to progressively overload that for a while, it will slowly increase because you're kind of triggering hypertrophy. You're still sort of triggering muscle growth, so your muscles will grow slowly as you try and do that, but definitely not as much as if you were training for hypertrophy specifically. When you switch back to hypertrophy style training, you increase the size of your muscles, right? So the size of your chest, the size of your shoulders, the size of your triceps, the size of whatever, right? All those pushing muscles. The force it's able to generate becomes greater. perhaps your strength actually goes down, right? Like the number on your bench press actually goes down because you're not training for 1 rep maxes anymore. You're switching to reps of 10. You're doing more hypertrophy focused training, right? You're not really training for that. So you don't do that as often. So your strength actually will go down slightly. Your capability, your like upper ceiling, not your upper ceiling, but the number that you can push rather goes down. But as you work hypertrophy, your upper ceiling goes up, right? The number you were able to hit starts to grow. And then what you can do is, after you've built a lot of muscle mass, after you've added that extra muscle mass to your frame, then you can go on an arc where you train strength. Then you can go on a little sprint or like a season where you train strength. So muscle mass is an important part of strength. Now, you can still make strength the greatest number if you are really concerned with strength. I'm not. I'm like building an aesthetic physique, so I think muscle mass is far more important. And I think muscle mass also adds to strength, right? Because we're, of course, progressively overloading. And so we still kind of try to be strong, even if we're training with more reps, right? But even if you are training for strength, you have to admit that muscle mass is important. Training for hypertrophy is important, because that'll add to the amount of force that you can generate. So if you want to get stronger, if you're really concerned about your strength and like the number you can push on an exercise, you still have to make sure you're training for hypertrophy. That's important. And if you've hit a plateau on strength, which you will likely do if you are solely focused on strength, and you reach that upper limit, that upper ceiling, then the answer is to switch back to training for hypertrophy for a little while. Train for hypertrophy until your muscles grow bigger, then return to strength. I know a lot of you guys are not football players, you're not trying to be football players and stuff like that, but we often fall into the trap of training for strength, right? The numbers on the bench press, the squat, and the deadlift are not just important for football players. We like to see them too. We like to see that we can bench a certain number of plates. We like to see that we can squat a certain number of plates. We like to see that we can deadlift a certain number of plates, right? Of course. And so we try and find out what our 1 rep max is. The problem is, if we pursue that for too long, we end up plateauing because we're not increasing the muscle mass at a fast enough rate. We're not training for hypertrophy, right? We're not focused on muscle mass. So we do our strength thing, right? We get under the bench and we do a little warm up, and then we do like 2 sets of 60%, 2 reps of 60% of our 1 rep max, and then 1 rep kind of close to our 1 rep max, then our 1 rep max, and then we like try and go up to, above our 1 rep max to hit a new PR and stuff like that. And when you do that for too long, you simply don't grow at the rate that you could have if you just focused on hypertrophy. And then after you build muscle mass, enter the season where you focus on strength again. Don't fall into like the ego lifts, man. Ego lifts are fun. They're fun as fuck, right? I'm not going to deny that. Actually, I'm the same way. I love ego lifting too. I love like the important exercises like bench press, the ego exercises like bench press, right? I love to see those numbers as well. And they are some sort of like marker of your strength. Of course, they are important as well. However, focus on muscle mass. If you actually want to like improve the ego lifts, if you want to like, get stronger at the ego lifts, then the answer is still to just focus on muscle mass, increase muscle mass, but then also kind of do strength training as well. But muscle mass should take a priority. Hypertrophy should take a priority because, of course, it's common sense. The size of your muscles dictates the amount of force that they can generate. If you got any value from this video, there's something you can do which is a win-win for both of us, which is to scroll down and click the subscribe button. I win because I get a new subscriber. You win because anytime I have a new insight, learn something new, or try something new, I can make a video and directly give you value. Thank you so much for watching. The top link in the description is my full program. If you are interested, you'll benefit just from clicking that, checking it out, reading what is attached to the description, and then watching the video attached as well, and seeing if that's for you. Because if it is for you, then you'll lose by not just checking it out. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.